Well, we are at the top of the hour, so let's get started. Not a minute to waste. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Management Q's webinar series on the art of effective management. We are excited to have you join us today for yet another enlightening and impactful journey into effective management practices. I'm Marisa Stoltzfus, your HROD executive expert, bringing you more than 25 years of experience, and I have the privilege of hosting this webinar series. Before we dive into the world of management, let's just take a moment to discuss why this series is so crucial. Our business landscape is evolving all the time. Effective management isn't just a skill, it's a strategic imperative. Whether you're leading a small team or an entire organization, the ability to manage resources, to manage people, and to manage processes is a cornerstone of success. The Art of Effective Management series is designed to share knowledge, tips, and tools that will help you to navigate the complexities of management, will help you enhance team performance, and help you drive organizational success. While this is not a comprehensive training program, we will explore various functions of management, a few effective communication strategies, and some key decision-making points that help nurture a positive workplace culture. For today, our topic is organization as a function of management. We'll explore the various responsibilities associated with organization management and how to prioritize and stay organized, the connection of this function with other management functions, and we'll share a few key takeaways for you to apply in your day-to-day. We value your insights and questions, so feel free to participate actively in the chat box. Now, allow me to introduce Dr. Myra Austin, CEO and founder of Management Qs, who will walk you through today's topic. Myra.
Thank you, Marisa. Thank you. Fabulous introduction. So as is proper, I'll start with some compliance around this webinar series. So the Management Qs webinar series is intended for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon in reaching a conclusion over an employment area of law. And what we mean by that is we will discuss experience, we will discuss training areas and tips that are going to help you be successful, but by no means is it actual legal guidance. So if you run into anything in your environment that's specific to what's going on there, please escalate that up to your HR leader or to legal counsel. This is a source of reference, so it could be a starting point in your discovery process, but it's for informational purposes only. So with that said, let's get into it. Okay, so I'm Dr. Myra Austin. I have over 2 decades of experience along with Marisa. My experience comes from the operations and management areas of business, and my passion is really, really rooted in management. And so that's the reason for Management Qs is my passion around setting managers up to succeed and teaching the things that maybe go unsaid and create a competitive advantage for some managers out there. Marisa is an executive in HR and organizational development, and so she brings a wealth of experience into the workforce and really can speak to the HR side of things as it relates to management. So she's a great person and a great resource to use and utilize through these webinars to ask any questions with regard to HR. Okay, let's get into it for today. So we'll do an overview of organization as maybe you've never heard it before, as it pertains to the function of management. I'll break that down and go through some insights that create some depth around organization. It's definitely not just organizing your desk and that kind of stuff. It goes a little bit deeper. And we'll go through some takeaways and resources, and then we'll open it up to Q&A so you can ask some questions, and we'll go through some closing remarks. Okay, let's get into it. Organization like you've never seen it before. Okay, so organization as a function of management, like I mentioned, is not the day-to-day type of organization that we might be thinking of in lay terms. When it comes to the function of management, organization is the process of assembling the people, organizing resources, and distributing planned work necessary to carry out the manager's plan. So that alone has a loaded amount of depth into it. It's a combination of a lot of the other functions that we've been discussing as well. The organization function helps bring people together for a common goal and use what is available to them effectively and efficiently. I think that the marker of an effective manager and leader is one that really understands and is aware of what is available to them in their environment, but also knows how to create order of it. And that's one of the key areas when it comes to organization as a function of management. Organization and management is driven by the goals that are identified through the planning function of management. So in our prior series, we went through what planning looked like as a management function. So this is how these two functions run into each other. So let's keep going. Let's go even deeper. So organizing effectively in management really means defining and identifying specific reporting relationships. So it's knowing the organization chart. It's understanding how communication should flow through it. And this particularly comes up a lot in HR. So I'll tip it over to you in a minute, Marisa, but understanding how you're supposed to relate to one another in an organization is critical to being organized and being effective as a manager. It creates boundaries. It allows you to manage the transitions that happen in an organization. And so when you're not including that in your mindset as part of being organized as a manager, you're missing out on an area or opportunity of effectiveness. Marisa, what do you think is a common theme that you see when it comes to this type of organization in the workforce environments you've been in?
Yeah, well, the communication aspect of it, Dr. Myra, is absolutely critical. Knowing the hierarchy of the organization, knowing how the relationships need to interact together. Sometimes the hierarchy is, top down and bottom up. Sometimes it is more flat, and it creates a different type of work environment. So knowing that hierarchy and knowing the relationships is really critical to make sure that the communication is effective, right? And it's appropriate.
Yeah, great insight there. So one thing that she said that was really important was understanding whether it's horizontal or vertical in the organization, whether it's top down or across the organization. And that really depends on the culture that you have and how the environment has been structured. So that, again, requires a little bit of self-awareness as to how are you structured? Even if you're an entry-level manager, how you're structured is part of you being organized, because you're going to be directing others in terms of communication and execution as well. Delineate formal communication channels. So as a manager, with what we just spoke about, you're providing direction to your teams as to how to communicate. You're creating organization out of communication. Describe how separate actions and individuals are related to one another. So it's not just the communication then. If we take a deeper dive, it's how we're working with one another. And so the gold nuggets in this particular slide are knowing how you're set up in the organization, because that creates the opportunity for how you should communicate. And then what are we each doing in terms of execution of our roles and responsibilities? So all of that plays into organization. So organization management responsibility. So this is what the manager should be focusing on when it comes to organization. So determining necessary priority activities, and we'll talk about setting priority in a minute, but setting priority is part of the manager's responsibility when it comes to their team. So if you're hearing in your environment, we don't have time. If you're hearing in your environment, I'm stressed, I'm burning out, you hear these kinds of words, then this determining function isn't being met yet, because there's supposed to be balance and the manager is supposed to provide that. Grouping company activities for the right departments and roles. So not everybody in the company is supposed to be doing everything. It's supposed to be segmented and defined through roles and responsibilities. The manager gives meaning to that by setting boundaries and making sure that they're not overlapping, they're not stepping over, that the scope of the department is understood, and that at the end of the day, you don't walk into an HR claim, because that can happen when this is mismanaged. Assigning the appropriate authority and responsibility to team members and managers. So making a distinction of what is happening, right? And there could be confusion around this particular aspect of it when there's excessive delegation and then the role definition is lost. For example, developing working relationships between leaders and team members to remain on track. Keeping the peace is part of the management role. It's a higher level awareness and responsibility. It's you maintaining the flow and guarding the flow versus maybe protecting a team member and disrupting the flow, right? So it's having that higher degree of awareness, and then communicating on policies, procedures, and guidance to keep execution and roles clear. Now, this one I run into all the time. And I'll tell you the number one derailer for that one is the managers don't know the policy. They don't have protocol, and hence they can't be organized. They have to start with the idea of organization first. So Marisa, this one has a lot of little HR nuggets in between. So share with us a little bit of what you think of these areas.
The thing that keeps coming up for me as you were going through these areas are establishing boundaries, right? If we don't have boundaries, and I know this is really hard for the people pleasers that are out there in the world, but if you don't establish boundaries, that's when the chaos starts to creep in. That's when there's the stress. That's when there's comments around, I don't have enough time, or I'm overwhelmed, right? And those are all negative moods that will contribute negatively to the execution. So boundaries are very important in determining, grouping, assigning, developing, and communicating.
Oh, so brilliant. So here's the big gigantic nugget there. If you have difficulty with boundaries, start with organizing, and slowly it'll shift your mindset so that you understand the bigger objective and it doesn't become so personal. Because the management function is really not about it being personal. It's about being on point. Okay. Okay. So how to remain organized as a manager. So this is a short list, but it's where to start. So start with prioritizing tasks, use a task management system, create to-do list, set clear goals, block time on your calendar for organization focus time. This is important. It's more important than getting things done, because this will help you define what should get done, not just doing, right? That's where the time wasters come into play. Delegate effectively, and there is an art to delegation. It's not just handing it over, by the way, effective managers. Conduct regular check-ins, use technology wisely, and declutter your workspace. So if you haven't focused on organization, start with these 9 things. It'll get you to at least a point of higher clarity, and then you could start really being effective when it comes to organization. So I wanted to share this matrix because I know it's hard. I know it's hard to set boundaries. I know it's hard to allocate time to organization because we think other things are important. And the reality is that there is a way of defining what is important and what isn't for a manager. As a manager, you're playing a higher function, a higher level role. You're meant to direct and provide clarity in order to execute. That is the whole reason management exists. Okay. So there is a method to the madness, and this should kind of help you visually understand it. So not everything is urgent, right? There are things that are not urgent, but do need to get done. There are things that should be delegated and create an opportunity for others. Okay. And that's a strategic way of using delegation. There are things that just are so low, you shouldn't even consider them in the priority ranking. Okay. So that is all true of everything that managers handle day to day. So let's start with urgent and important. So these are the high value tasks that have set deadlines and consequences if not completed. So for me personally, as a manager, and I've managed in every capacity, so I've done all the grunt work in my particular journey. If it doesn't have a legal or financial consequence, it goes down. It gets bucketed down a little bit, right? And if there's nothing that has a legal or financial consequence, then I move on to the next bucket. Okay. When it comes to valuable but lower value, these are low value tasks that need to be completed but don't require your expertise. So they do need to get done because it's about maintenance and keeping things on track. A lot of this stuff has to maybe do with keeping processes going, completing orders, right? These are the types of things that happen every day. They do need to get done, but you can train somebody to do it, or there's somebody that's eager to learn that deserves an opportunity, and it should be delegated to. So that's you gauging your environment. You don't want to be the kind of manager that holds on to everything, because then you're not creating autonomy in your environment. So keep that in mind as we're going through this. What are some of the things that maybe you really are hesitant to let go because only you feel like only you can do it, and see where it falls in this matrix? Because you may just be telling yourself that, and that happens too. So not urgent, high value tasks around long-term goals with no set deadlines. If there is no set deadline or conclusion, it's not urgent. It hasn't been defined. There's no reason for there to be pressure or stress around it. You just simply put it aside and focus on the things that are deadline oriented. Low value tasks that interrupt your focus and pull time from your other tasks. So if you have tasks that are pulling away from any of these three buckets, you need to either trash it or create it in such a low level area, put it in such a low level area that it does not disrupt your focus, because as a manager, your focus is more important than rudimentary tasks. You're beyond that once you're in a management role. So that's a distinction, and it does require a little bit of maturity. So any comments, Marisa, on the Eisenhower matrix?
Yeah, just a few. First and foremost, the more you use it, the better you'll get at it. You won't have to reference it. You'll be able to bucket your priorities accordingly. We tend to do the work that we're most familiar with and that we enjoy doing, and that's not always the work that needs to be the high priority. So keep that in mind as you're using the Eisenhower matrix. And when you're thinking about delegation, think about delegation for development. How can I teach something new by delegating something new to somebody who doesn't know how to do it, as opposed to always going to the same person who I know will get it done in 5 minutes.
Oh, great advice. Great advice. And remember, managers, if you're going to be effective, you have to challenge yourself to do the things that make you uncomfortable. So let go. Okay. Okay. Management organization. And we're going to talk about the secret sauce. We're going to talk about the things that aren't as obvious that fall into organization, and maybe we weren't aware of it before. Okay. So resource allocation. So this is one of the primary areas that I work with managers on, because it requires awareness of their environment, what's available to them. And a lot of the time they're not aware, or they're not utilizing certain resources the employer has that are available to them. And I run into that very, very often. So through organization, managers ensure that the resources available are allocated effectively and efficiently. Keywords: effectively and efficiently, using them the right way at the right time for the right reasons. Okay. Managers are responsible for allocation of the following resources in the work environment. So here's the secret sauce right here. Here's what they don't tell you, right? This is what you figure out 20 years later, right, Marisa? This is what the resources in what you're managing and what you should consider in the work environment. Human capital, people, right? Part of the organization, not in spite of it. Finances, department budgets and spending, how your department or your group or your team, whatever it is, whatever you're managing, what does spending look like there? That's what sets you up for that higher leadership role, is starting to understand those things. Equipment, what machinery or hardware do you routinely use? Time, how is time being utilized? These are all resources managers are responsible for having an awareness around. And it's really what equips them to have a competitive advantage when they understand it really well.
Yeah.
You look like you have something to say.
Yeah, when you talk about human capital, you're talking about having the right people in the right roles, doing the right things, using the right equipment, and doing it in a timely fashion. And that's how that all comes together.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I like to mention the derailers because sometimes we don't know that they're derailers, but they are. And so if you're too much of a helper, and if your team's helping every other department constantly and there's no boundaries, your resource allocation is off. And so you might be hurting more than you're serving. That's why it's important to understand these boundaries and that you have to be organized about how you use resource allocation. Okay, so role clarity, this has got to be my favorite one. Let me tell you how difficult the lack of role clarity makes organization planning and every other function that management is responsible for. So managers who are organized are well versed in the roles and responsibilities that team members and managers occupy. So there's a very clear understanding of who does what and why. If you find yourself not knowing why somebody is doing something or why they're responsible for that, it's time to look at job descriptions. It's time to have a meeting with your HR person because the whole direction you're providing could be completely off. And that could then ultimately result in a lot of problems, a lot of employee problems. Clear rules prevent confusion. Clear rules prevent overlap in tasks, and clear rules prevent conflict. Sometimes as managers, when we don't have this awareness, we are inviting conflict in. We're saying, hey, come here, let's have a party, because nobody knows what they're supposed to be doing and there's no clear understanding, and that's where the problem begins. Role clarity makes workflow go smoothly. So it's important for you to know that organization and role clarity, they partner together. They go hand in hand. So you can't be organized if there isn't any role clarity, and vice versa, right? So it's important to understand how those relate to one another. Marisa, this one is also ties into HR. So as we're talking about this, hopefully the managers on the call can see the big tie-ins into HR and why it's so important to have a relationship there.
And role clarity is all about boundaries, right? It's all about setting boundaries, setting expectations, giving people the direction that they need to do the work that they're assigned to do. So, yep.
Yeah, yep. And it goes right into the legal areas too. Okay, so coordination and collaboration as part of organization. So managers who are organized facilitate coordination and collaboration among different departments, teams, and team members. And the organization piece is you understand how it's supposed to flow. So you make better decisions. Your approach is mitigated. You know, if you see a problem, you have a tendency to have a strategic approach versus a personal or emotional approach because you understand that it's about being organized. Organization closely partners with the coordination function of management. And so this function of management will be in one of the series coming up, but coordination partners with a lot of these other functions. Effective collaboration ensures that managers and team members are on the same page. And again, it sounds simple, but it's not. I've been out there. A lot of the times, part of the conflict that we have in the ineffectiveness in collaboration or coordination has to do with our lack of organization. Managers who are strong organizers and coordinators achieve synergy. So synergy is a mutually advantageous conjunction or compatibility. We have a connection. We have a way of working. It's like a rhythm, like a song. And so it's important for us to know that organization then is at the central point of that. If you're organized, you know what expectations to set, but you also know how to direct more efficiently. Scalability and growth. We hear a lot about scalability and growth. And you know, we're scaling a business. We have a lot of growth coming. And when all of that happens, organization is the most important part. So our focus shouldn't be that it's coming. The focus should be how organized are we? Because that is what's going to result in an outcome that's successful, not the fact that we're growing. That's only a momentary seasonal thing. What we do with that growth, what we do with that opportunity has everything to do with how well organized we are. So managers who are organized manage growth and complexity effectively. So growth can be chaos. Growth can be scary. Growth can be the beginning of the end is what it can be when it's mismanaged. And so organization is what helps you as a manager navigate change effectively. It's part of you being able to handle things in an orderly fashion and in a sync. You don't disrupt your team. You create a flow. They know what to expect because you as a manager are organized. Organization allows managers to pivot quickly, communicate clearly, and allocate resources as needed. So again, having an awareness of what you have available to you helps you keep these things in sync.
And they're all going to be in sync if you did the planning.
That's right. So this is how these functions, they play into each other. So the functions of management really set expectations as to what you should be focusing on. And so, the awareness around that is just so critical to becoming an effective manager. So we've come to the end. Our webinar sessions are quick. They're snack size for you guys. So these are our key takeaways today. The organization function incorporates management and awareness of human capital, finances, equipment, and time. So I would put those in a checklist, to be quite honest, and make sure that I'm looking at that on a recurring basis, or maybe on monthly, weekly basis, because that will help you direct your department and your available resources. Effective organizations requires strategic prioritization. So just like we saw in the matrix, it requires a little bit of thought. And so if you're not making time to put in the thought, you're working. Of course, we're all working and we all work hard, but I've seen many, many managers work so hard in the wrong direction. And so you have to ask yourself, do you want to complete things every day, or do you want to be effective and make an impact and have a competitive advantage? What is it that you want to do? Because they require a different discipline. The secret sauce behind organization includes role clarity, coordination, and collaboration. These things play into organization and vice versa. A manager who is organized will effectively maneuver through growth and will be able to scale in any environment. A manager who is organized and understands the insights behind the function of organization and management is going to effectively navigate everything well. There's no problem you could throw at them that they won't be able to conquer. The organization function of management is complementary to the coordination function of management. So in an upcoming series, we'll dive into coordination as a function of management. Okay, well, those are the key takeaways for today. So I will hit it back to you, Marisa.
Sure. We're just shy of a couple of questions. If there are any questions out there, we've got time for maybe one or two. But one of the questions I have for you, Dr. Myra, is how do we delineate between these different functions of management so that we are, in fact, being the best manager we can be?
Yeah, delineate. Like, how do we separate them from one another? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, yeah.
So I think one is first having awareness that they exist. So I think that that's where I see the light bulbs go off when I train managers or when I partner with managers, is first understanding that there is a function to fulfill. We're defining them briefly in this webinar series, but in our in-depth trainings, we take deep dives into what they actually mean and how they work and what you should look for. So while they're complementary to one another, they are separate. They do each come with their own checklists of to-dos. So I think that first, if you never knew that there were functions of management, you've already grown a little bit by joining us, right? And if you already knew that those functions existed, then it's time for you to take the next step and break each function down and put a list together of what it takes to execute each one. I think that those are baby steps, but they're so fundamentally sound that once you understand those things, you'll be more effective, just because you can never unlearn something. Once you've learned it, it's in there. And once you see something, you can't unsee it. And once you go into your environment, you'll definitely be able to tell how it makes a difference in your management style and in your execution. And if you feel like you don't see it, I would encourage you to ask your team.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much. So last week we learned about planning. This week we've learned about organization. So I'm going to conclude today's session. And in doing so, I want to encourage all of you in the audience and those of you who will watch this later to take the insights that you've gained and to begin to apply them to your professional journey. It's, every little bit makes a difference. If you have further questions or would like to revisit today's content, the recording, of course, of this webinar, the deck, and a surprise or two will be emailed to all participants. You can find additional resources, including things like management planners and other tools that can support your ongoing development at the website, www.managementcues.org. Connect with us again next week as we continue this series on the art of effective management. Next week is, a special day, February 14th, but we will be meeting at 10 a.m. Pacific, so plan to join us. You can also join us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn to stay updated on future events and to share any feedback that you might have regarding our sessions. So thank you so much for being part of the Art of Effective Management series, and we'll look forward to seeing you again next week. Thank you, Dr. Mike.